This Torah class is brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.
I believe, but I want to express again my Karsa Tov. I've met Rabbi Glatstein through, of course, Torah Anytime, listening to Shiurim. What I've told a lot of people to listen to Rabbi Glatstein, and the thing that impresses me most is the following. I've heard good Shiurim before, but I listened to one shiur from Rabbi Glatstein, and I said, "Wow, this is a really good shiur." And then I listened to another one. So, wow, this is a really good shiur. And then another one, and then another one. And it's just a consistent, high-quality shiurim full of Torah and insights and everything is just really breathtaking. So, haven't been driving as much. I haven't had as much time to listen. But I've listened many hours of shiurim. The amount of Torah Glatstein spreads around the world is just remarkable. And it's a real big kavod for us. To have because of having him with us. Thank you, Rabbi Glatstein.
Okay, thank you very much, Rabbi Kessenbaum, for the very warm introduction. It's really an honor to be able to speak to B'nai Torah right before the Yom Tov of Kabbalas Hatorah, and especially to this yeshiva in particular, under the leadership of Yedidi Rav Kessenbaum Shlita, as I would like also to be considered mitalmidei your Rabbi. You know, I'm a big fan of the Olam Hamidos. It's also available in English, an art scroll. And actually our family very much enjoys learning from it. And one of my favorite parts of the Sefer is one of the Haskamos. Now, you're not going to believe which one it is, and I don't even think you could possibly guess. My favorite Haskama comes from the Rav of a shul where I grew up in, and that is I grew up in Flatbush in the Aguda, and our first Rav was Rav Yitzchak Izbi, Zechrono Livracha, and then Yibadol Ben Chaim L'Chaim, Rav Pinchas Breuer, who was a very great Talmud Chacham, who is a very great Talmud Chacham, tremendous Lamdin, tremendous Talmud Chacham, and also a tremendous Baal Midos, and someone who would certainly appreciate the work that your Rebbe has put in, because today we have many great Talmidei Chachamim, and we have many great Lamdanim, but as we know that Reb Chaim Vital famously asks, that there seems to be a whole subject which is absent from the Torah. There's very little discussion in the Torah about the subject of Midas. It doesn't really say in the Torah, don't get angry, or it doesn't really say clearly in the Torah the importance of humility. Maybe there are psukim that allude to it, and they do warn us against arrogance, but it doesn't seem to be a major theme. Midos do not seem to be a major theme in the Torah. Yes, Maise mitzvahs are the subject of the Torah, 613 mitzvahs, but Midos, they don't seem to be thematic in the Torah. And Reb Chaim Vital famously says that Midos are the very foundation of the Torah. They are the predecessor of the Torah. They are what the Torah stands on. So if you're Zoicha to have a Rebbe who not only is a great Marbitz Torah, but he was Amel v'Yagea in what the Olam Hamidos, which is a subject which is Rechav Minayam, then you, Baruch Hashem, will have the strongest possible foundation to grow Lamala. And I want to give the Rebbe a bracha that he should continue his tremendous avodah in good health, and lahagdil Torah lahadira. Okay, so we have a very nice group today, so let's have just a candid conversation. I'll share with you some personal thoughts about Limud HaTorah, some things that I find to be personally meaningful, and Be'ezus Hashem, hopefully we'll try to come out with something l'tayalas. So I'll tell you some personal things about myself. About 3.5 years ago, our shul started a program called Daf HaShavua. And I'm very happy we started it. It's been a very meaningful limud to me personally. We learn an Amud one night, an Amud the next night, and then we chazer it on Shabbos. That we do together. And over the course of the week, we try to review it as much as possible. And there's something that I realized in yeshiva, it took me many, many years to realize this. And once it sort of dawned on me, it was a real game changer. In the yeshiva that I went to, I actually went to Yeshiva Chafetz Chaim. I learned in Yeshiva Chafetz Chaim in Brooklyn, and then in Forest Hills, and then Kew Garden Hills. And the method with which we learned Bekiyos, Chafetz Chaim is well known for the amount of time they spend on Iyun, but they actually have 2 starim a day in Bekiyos. And the method of Bekiyos is you go through either a blot and a half a week or 2 blot a week, Gemara, Rashi, Tosfos, and you do it twice. And I would find that the first time I would do it, it was very difficult. I didn't really understand it, and I didn't even get much out of it. And it was almost, in a way, very dejecting every time I saw a Gemara for the first time. And then I realized, you will never get the Gemara the first time. You're just not going to get it the first time. And there's some kind of it's almost like a magic, that when you learn something the first time, you're just being exposed to the words, you're being exposed to the concepts, you're being exposed to the question, the answer, the ideas, and you may not get it, you likely won't get it. Many people, if not most people, they don't understand the Gemara the first time around. And I found the second time, all of a sudden something happened. What happened? All of a sudden, I get it. Why am I getting it more the second time than the first time? It's just, that's the way Torah is. It takes a number of times until you understand it. And it's almost not, you can't explain this. There's no rational explanation why I'm not getting it the first time, I'm getting it the second time. That's just the way the Torah is. It does take a few times until the Torah sinks in. And once I understood that, my first time learning something became a whole new experience. I was prepared to read the Gemara, translate the Gemara, try to understand the Gemara, and I was prepared not to get it the first time, but don't worry, I'm going to get it the second time or maybe the third time. And what's interesting is, it's really Beferish Gemara and Erevin. The Gemara says, and the Stipler brings this Gemara lahalacha, that the way Moshe taught the Torah to Klal Yisrael is Moshe taught it to Aaron, then he taught it to the Zakenim, then he taught it to Aaron's sons, and then he taught it to the rest of Klal Yisrael. So Moshe ended up teaching 4 times, and then Aaron ended up learning it 4 times, and the Zakenim ended up learning it 4 times, and Klal Yisrael ended up learning it 4 times. And the Stipler derives from this Gemara that until you learn a Gemara 4 times, you didn't learn it yet. It's not that, I learned it twice and then I'm reviewing it a 3rd time and I'm reviewing it. No, it is not considered learning until you've gone through something 4 times. And I don't think you find this by any other subject. I think by math, 1 or 2 times, you get it. If you didn't get it the first time, you probably won't get it the second time. If you didn't get it the second time, you ain't getting it the 3rd time. Either you have the intellectual acumen or you don't. Torah is l'mala min hateva. There's almost like a mystical procedure. Be aware, be ready, be prepared that if you don't understand the shir, maybe when you review it, you're going to get it so much better. If you don't understand the Gemara the first time, and I'm not here to say today, halacha, you have to dafka learn it 4 times. You'll ask your Rabbeim exactly how many times is lefi madregasenu. The point is that there are supernatural ingredients to be successful in learning. You very likely won't understand it the first time, and you'll see mysteriously the next time you do something, you're going to get it. It's going to become clear to you. That's just the way Torah is. Torah has a different procedure than any other subject. That's just one personal thought I wanted to share with you. It just dawned on me. So we started Masechta Yivamis last night. We were learning Seder Moed. We learned, the small Masechtas, Tainis, Megillah, Chagiga. And last night we started Yivamis. I had learned Yivamis in Yeshiva, but it's been a number of years since I did Yivamis, and I was a little apprehensive. And I prepared the Gemara, and after last night's shir, I had such a simcha, I had such a happiness learning Yivamis. Yivamis is a very hard Gemara. But after preparing the Gemara and, schwitzing it out a little bit, and we didn't do anything spectacular. We did Gemara, we did Rashi's, I spoke out of Tosfos. But just working hard and getting clear a page of Gemara, I forgot. I was learning maybe easier Masechtas. I lost touch. I lost a little touch of the simcha that a person could have just working extra hard in understanding a piece of Gemara. So I think it's always worthwhile to remember that, number one, Torah, you're not going to necessarily understand it right away. Don't be afraid. Don't worry. It's not you. It's not you. It's everyone. It doesn't mean you're not smart. It doesn't mean you're not cut out for it. It doesn't mean you won't be successful. That's the way Torah is. You got to put in that, a little bit of extra effort. That little bit of extra effort makes all the difference in the world. I just heard a beautiful pshat. The Gemara says that there's no similarity, there's no comparison between someone who reviews their learning 100 times and someone who reviews their learning 101 times. And by the way, Rabbi Kessemam, I had a prepared shir, but this is extemporaneous. This is just personal thoughts about Limud Hatorah. And then hopefully
afterwards the Rav can give a shir to
Okay. So the Gemara says there's no comparison between someone who learns 100 times and someone who learns 101 times. And we would think, what do you mean there's no comparison? If anything, they're very comparable. I mean, why is there such a big difference between 100 and 101? It would not seem to make all the Gemara doesn't say there's no comparison between 94 and 95 or 37 and 38. So why is the Gemara focusing on 100 and 101? And Rav Ruderman, Zechariah Bracha, explains the way Torah works is it sometimes just takes that little extra degree of effort. The guy who learns something 100 times, he has neatly and very conveniently packaged a program of 100 times. He figures, okay, I have my system, I have my program, I have a very neat number that I'm going to fit my learning into. And once he's finished, he may settle and say, okay, what more could I do? The guy who learned it 101 says, this is not about doing it a even number of times. This is not about a convenient number. This is all about, if I have the opportunity just to give it a little extra. Torah is about the little bit of extra. That little bit of extra, you'll find, makes all the difference in the world. You didn't get the shir, great. You don't want to try again? We don't want to try again. But sometimes that little extra effort makes all the difference in the world. I also always wondered, okay, that's very nice. Rav Moshe Feinstein learned Shulchan Aruch, 300 something times. Supposedly, he chazered Shas, 200 times or something, or more. And is that really within our ability? Or is it the Gemara talking to, a few people in a generation, and everybody else, they're lucky if they, if they do Daf Yomi, they'll do it, 7 times in their life. But there's no realistic way to ever achieve those numbers. So I saw another stipler. The stipler says an amazing thing. If somebody prepares a Gemara clearly, and he then gives a shir or says it over to somebody else, that level of clarity and giving over has the status of 40 or 50 times learning the Gemara. You hear that? In other words, if you prepare a Gemara, you get it clear, and you say it doesn't have to be to a big shir, it could be to another chavrusa. The level of effort and clarity needed to prepare a Gemara and to say it over, that itself is 40 to 50 times. So it dawned on me, that makes things much more possible. I don't know if I'm going to be able to learn Shas 101 times, but I could certainly find 2 people with whom I'll prepare an Amud of Gemara and say it over to them, and that itself is 80 to 100 times right there. And there you go. This is not the Gemara Kipshuta, that's not the simple interpretation of the Gemara, but the stipler understands that when a person says something over, I think they say, Reb Chaim Brisker would say, that, the Rebbe says, you understand it? Yeah. Say it over. I can't say it over. Reb Chaim would say, if you can't say it over, you don't understand it. There's a certain level of clarity needed to be able to express something and say it over. So any bachar in yeshiva, anybody in learning, always has the opportunity to find someone that they could give over to. And if not, you don't want to give it to someone, get a tape recorder, prepare the Gemara, and record yourself saying it. That itself, I guarantee, will take a less amount of time than actually chazering it 50 times. So, I find that's a very good eitzah. I will tell you, I always thought, if somebody would learn something many, they won't forget it. You should know Torah is very elusive. Don't ever get dejected. I reviewed, and I still don't remember. Chassam Sofer writes, I think it's in his Hagoyis on Shulchan Aruch, that Klal Yisrael came down to Bavel, and they're in Bavel only 70 years, and they forgot Lashon HaKodesh. And the Chassam Sofer is bewildered. How could it be that the Jewish people forgot Lashon HaKodesh in 70 years? And he basically says that the reason why Hebrew is called Lashon HaKodesh is because it has inherent Kedusha. And anything that has inherent Kedusha is not a shidduch with a mind which is basar v'dam. In other words, naturally, Torah and the human mind don't go together. And that is why Torah seems to be so elusive. That is why maybe I could remember Don Mattingly's average for the Yankees in 1986 and 1987, and how many at-bats he had, and how many hits he had, and how many gold gloves he wore, and I can't remember what I learned yesterday. Why is that? Because useless information is natural to the mind. The mind is flesh and blood. But Torah is davar shebekdusha. Torah is holy. It's not a natural shidduch. And that's why it requires that supernatural effort. But that extra degree of effort makes all the difference in the world. So now I'm going to tell you, part of the idea that I had in mind to be able to share with you. It's an idea that I said over in a number of venues lately, but I find it particularly meaningful. I think if you'd ask most people how many types of mitzvos are there, I think most people would say that there are two main kinds of mitzvahs. There's bein adam lamakam, bein adam lachaveroi. So for example, I get up in the morning and I daven, so that's between me and God. And I visit the sick, or I lend money to someone in need, that's between me and my friend. There, bein adam lamakam, bein adam lachaveroi, you have the luchos on the right side, that's bein adam lamakam. I have the luchos on the left side, that's bein adam lachaveroi. And I have averos that are between me and God, avodah zara. I have averos between me and my friend, ritzicha. And there are two avenues, there are two branches of mitzvahs. But the Vilna Gaon comes along in Sefer Devarim and he says, no, there is a third category of mitzvah, an amazing category of mitzvah. The Gemara says in Psachim Adaf Samaches, Rav Sheshes would review his learning every 30 days. And when 30 days were over, Rav Sheshes would say, Chadoi nafshoi, Chadoi nafshoi. Rejoice, my soul, rejoice, my soul. Akruye lecha, asnuye lecha. I learn Chumash for you, I learn Mishnah for you. And the Gemara asks, wow, how selfish. Rav Sheshes would rejoice and say to himself, I learn for myself, I learn for myself. Don't we have a tradition in Brisi Shamayim V'aretz in Brisi Yoimam V'layla Chuka Shamayim V'aretz Samti? Don't we have a tradition that the Torah upholds the whole world? The Torah pumps vitality into the whole world. We say in davening every day, the Torah is a Torah's Chayim. It's a living Torah. What does it mean it's a living Torah? The Chavetz Chaim writes in the Avas Chesed. It's a living Torah that when Hashem gave us the Torah at Har Sinai, He opened up all the Rekiim, all the Madurei Mata, and we saw that what pumps vitality and life into creation, the Torah. If there would be a moment of time that the Torah was not being learned, the world would self-destruct, it would disintegrate. So why would Rav Sheshes say, I learned Torah for you, I learned Mishnah for you? He learns for the whole world. And the Gemara says, Me'ikara, a person learns for their own soul. The simple pshat in the Gemara is me'ikara. In the beginning, when you start off learning, you learn for yourself. And maybe ultimately one day, you move on to the madrega where you could learn to benefit the world. But that's not what the Gemara means. Because me'ikara in this Gemara does not mean in the beginning. Me'ikara says, the Sifsei Chaim, me'ikara means primarily, fundamentally, mainly. A person learns for themselves. And let's explain this. What does it mean a person learns for themselves? The Gra reveals an astounding principle. Comes the Vilna Gaon, and the Vilna Gaon says, there are mitzvahs bein adam la'makayim. There are mitzvahs bein adam la'chaverai. And there's a mitzvah bein adam la'atzmai, a mitzvah between a person and themselves. What mitzvah is between a person and themselves? Says the Gra, Avodah Zarah ruins your relationship with God. Shvichas Damin ruins your relationship with man. And Giloy Arayos, Chas Noyef Ish Chasar Lev. Giloy Arayos is self-destructive. There are certain Averos, is not so much they're going to sever your connection with God. Not so much they're going to ruin your relationship with your friend. It is self-destructive. It ruins you. And there are certain mitzvahs, it's not so much they strengthen your connection to Ribbon Shalom, which they may. Not so much they strengthen your relationship with another Jew. There are certain mitzvahs that are bein adam la'atzmai. What does that mean, a mitzvah bein adam la'atzmai? What, it strengthens your relationship with you? Rav David Koyen, the Yeshiva of Hebron, explains this Gra. What does it mean, Talmud Torah? The Gra says Talmud Torah is a mitzvah bein adam la'atzmai. What does this mean? He explains with the Maral in Masechta Sanhedrin. And I'm sharing with you my understanding of it. When the Ribbon Shalom created us, when Ribbon Shalom created man, Vayipach ba'apav nishmas chayim. He instilled in our nostril a living spirit. And we may be familiar with the teaching of the Zohar, man denafach midilei nafach. When God blew that soul into us, one who blows from within themselves. Which means that we could never even say such a thing. Ilmale ha-kosav amrai yafshar la'amrai. If God blew our nostril into us, that means the neshama is what we call chelek eloikam imal, a spark of the divine. So if we were to ask, me, I see the names over here, Yehuda, Eliyahu, Ezra, Tuv. I don't see Nafti, David, Yoni, Shalom, Yaakov, Lev, Yaakov. If I were to ask you, how much greatness is latent in me, in you? Well, I don't know, because my 5th grade Rabbi gave me a B's minus, so I don't know, I think I'm mediocre. No, that's the wrong answer. If I were to ask, how much greatness is latent within me? The answer is infinite. There's no end. There's no end. It doesn't matter whatever said on any report card or what anybody thinks of you. The reality is that the greatness that is dormant within every neshama is infinite. That means we're capable of infinite kindness, infinite compassion, infinite understanding of Hashem, infinite yiras Hashem, infinite love of Hashem, infinite kedusha, infinite tahara. There's no limit. So then why am I not actualizing it? How do I actualize it? The answer is, says the Maral, and this is what the Gra means, is there are mitzvahs bein adam la'makam, there are mitzvahs that strengthen our connection to God, there are mitzvahs bein adam la'chavera, there are mitzvahs that strengthen our connection to our friend, and there are mitzvahs bein adam la'atzmai, there are mitzvahs that help us actualize the greatness within us, that help bring out the kedusha that is in us, that help bring out the tara that is within us, that help bring out the compassion, the love, the midos toivos that are already programmed into our neshama. The Torah, it's not so much it connects us to Hashem, which absolutely it does more than any other mitzvah. It's not so much that it brings bracha to the whole world, which it absolutely does. The Torah primarily is for me to bring out my latent potential. Imagine a field. And in this field is planted every wonderful fruit. Apples, oranges, peaches, pears, grapes. But nothing is growing. Why isn't anything growing? Because nobody watered the field. It's the same thing with our soul and our personality. There are such beautiful fruits that are waiting to sprout from us. But what helps us actualize? It's like a modern concept, self-actualization. But it's not a novel concept. It's found in the Gra, it's found in the Maral. The Torah fundamentally and primarily is the mitzvah that helps us tap into and bring out the greatness that rests within us. And therefore, Rav Sheshes, at the end of every 30 days that he reviewed his learning, he would jump up and down and say, "Rejoice, my soul! Rejoice, my soul! I learned for you. I learned Mishnah for you." And the Gemara asks, what do you mean? Isn't he learning for the whole world? And the answer given is Me'ikara, primarily. Yes, when Reb Chaim Kanievsky learns, he upholds the whole world. When Reb Chaim Kanievsky learns, he's Mizdabek TaKadosh Baruch Hu. But Me'ikara, primarily, even the learning of a great Talmid Chacham is for himself, to bring out his own gadlus. And therefore Shavuos is a very happy day. It's happy for every individual in Klal Yisrael personally, because it's the day with which we are able to gain the tools to make something out of ourselves, to become something, whatever we will be in life. But our own inherent ability, we cannot fully access without the study of Torah. The Torah helps bring out what we could become. The Gemara famously says, Rabbi Yosef says, "Ilav hayoima," if not for this day of Shavuos, kama yosi ika b'shuka. I would be an average Joe, as they say. I wouldn't be anything special. But because I have the Torah, now I'm special. Rashi says a very simple word, "Ilav hayoima," if not for Shavuos, nisroi mamti. I elevated myself. Meaning Rav Yosef is articulating that the Torah is needed to take a person and to bring him up to the next level. It is the tool with which we're able to bring out the greatness within us, and that's what the Gra means, that Torah is a mitzvah bein adam la'atzmai. So I want to thank all of you for giving me the opportunity today, and I want to thank Yedidi, Yechashiva Rabbi, Rabbi Kesemem Shlita, and wishing everybody a good Yom Tif, a Chag Hashav Sameach, and thanks again for the opportunity, and bracha v'atzlacha, shkoyach.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Rabbi. That was delicious.
Thank you.
Thank you so much, Rabbi Glatstein. Rabbi Glatstein, would you take a question? Any questions? Or you have to...
Sure.
Yoni,
Can I ask you? Oh, no.
Sorry. Somebody want to ask something?
The Rabbi Bachai and the Baal Turim quote the. Do you hear me clearly, by the way?
Yeah, I'm hearing you. Yeah.
Okay, so the Rabbi Bachai and the Baal Turim quote the Medrash that says, "Hefker Kamidbar," to acquire Torah.
Yeah.
So, what does that mean exactly, and how have you applied that in your life?
To some degree, people have all their personal learnings and siddharim and obligations, and they have their own personal life. And someone comes along and says, could you explain this to me? Could you teach this to me? And you're thinking to yourself, why should I do it? I'm not getting anything out of it. He's not paying me. Why should I give up my time, my free time, my learning time? Why should I give up of me to help him? So the idea is, you make yourself like a doormat, basically, where you're mafkir yourself. I'm not getting anything out of it, but I'm making myself hefker to teach Torah, to give over. And in that way, Hashem gives siyata d'shmaya to be kainet. To be kainet.
Nice.
Yeah. Okay.
When I don't want to misquote, but I believe it was the Chafetz Chaim that said that if there's a second in the world where there's no Torah, then the world would destroy itself. Is that correct?
Yeah, I believe that's attributed to Reb Chaim Volozhiner. Yes.
Okay. So I was just wondering, does that mean like literal Torah learning, or if people are practicing Torah, does that count as well? Meaning, like, if someone, like, if no one is actually sitting with the Gemara open in front of them, but people are actually out there practicing what they learn in the Torah, do you think that would, like, suffice?
My understanding is that they were specifically referring to the Limud Hatorah. In other words, there's a very interesting concept that Limud Hatorah is considered on a completely different plane than performing mitzvahs. Obviously, we learn in order to perform, but in terms of inherent value, there's a concept that the learning of Torah is infinitely more valuable than the performance of a mitzvah, qualitatively. So, for example, the Gemara in Megillah talks about two items. You have a pair of tzitzis. So a pair of tzitzis, what do you do with a pair of tzitzis when you're finished wearing the tzitzis? Technically, you're allowed to throw in the garbage. So, okay, we follow the Ramah, we dispose of it, b'derech kavod, but it does not require burial. What do you do with the lulav and esrog when you're finished? Technically, you're allowed to throw it in the garbage. Okay, we treat it with respect, we put it in the biur chametz, but you're not obligated to. You don't have to bury it. A shofar, when you're finished with it, it doesn't have any kedusha. So why is it that tefillin, or even a mezuzah case, or even the straps of the tefillin, you have to bury a strap of tefillin. You have to bury a mezuzah case. Why? I'm not doing the mitzvah anymore. I took the parchment out. The answer is that's called tashmishe kedusha. That didn't just service mitzvahs. That serviced parshios of Torah. A shofar is a cheptza shel mitzvah. But once the mitzvah is over, there's no kedusha in the lulav, there's no kedusha in the shofar, there's no kedusha in an item with which you perform a mitzvah. But anything associated with the Torah, even the straps of tefillin, even the bima on which you read the Torah, you have to bury it. Because the kedusha of the Torah is a eternal kedusha. Anything associated with it retains its kedusha. That's why a Gentile, there's no mitzvah of kvura. You don't have to bury a Gentile. That's because they do mitzvahs in their lifetime. They have Sheva mitzvahs b'nei Noach, but they don't have kedusha because of that. Once their life is over, so maybe they're a chefza shel mitzvah. A Jew has to be buried because a Jew learned Torah, and therefore a Jew is a chefza shel mitzvah. And even a Jew that never learned anything in his life, the Malach taught him Torah. So a Yid is a pair of tefillin, a chefza shel kedusha. So there's a very big qualitative difference. So my understanding is that they learn this idea that the Torah upholds the world from the pasuk Lo brisi amlai chugashmayim ba'aretz lo samti. Brisi yom v'layla refers to the mitzvah of higisa b'yom v'layla. Again, this is not to undermine the performance of mitzvahs. The reward that a Jew will get for performing a mitzvah is also eternal. But the kedusha of Torah is a qualitatively completely different level.
All right, thank you.
Okay.
Do we have time for another question?
Sure.
So Rabbi, for like a moment, spoke about like that Torah is elusive and we forget.
Yeah.
And we shouldn't despair in that. And I was wondering if Rabbi has any practical tools in terms of working on being samech b'chelka in our Torah learning, in our abilities, in how much we're growing in it. Is that Rabbi can speak to that a little bit?
I once heard from our Rosh Yeshiva, Rav Henach Libu at Zechatzak Levracha. He quoted a gra. I've never seen this gra inside, and it's something that I grapple to understand. But he quoted the gra that says that when it comes to material possession, it's yesh leimana roitza masayim. You have $100, you want 200. Yesh masayim, you want another, you want 400. In the material world, either you're happy with what you have, or you want more. You can't have both. You can't do both. The Gemara says that you could actually have this dichotomy that when it comes to Torah, you could never be satisfied. Meaning you could be oyev mitzvos lo yizba mitzvos and be sameach b'chelkai at the same time. And it's not a stira, and it exists only in ruchnias, that you could have at the same time be happy with your madrega, be happy with what you've achieved, be happy with I chazered 3 times. I'm happy I was zoicha to do that, and at the same time want more. This is impossible in the physical world. You can't be happy and yet want more at the same time. So apparently Hashem gave us the bracha that while, we have to also be careful. If you get too taken with your sheifos of what you want, then, it could endanger your ability to be samech b'chalka. But it seems like there could be a happy equilibrium in the world of ruchnias to be rejoice in what you've attained and yet want more at the same time. So I think that's a good bracha that Rebbe Shem should be mevarich all of us, that this Shavuos we should all be sameach in our chelek in Torah and use it as the day as a motivation for even higher levels. Be'ezus Hashem. Shkayach.
Thank you so much. Thank you so much for Glatstein.
Thanks a lot, Rabbi Kestenbaum. Shkayach. Nice to see everyone.
Thank you very much.
Kol tov. Thanks a lot. Kol tov. Good Yom Tov. Chag Kosher Sameach. Shkayach.
You've just experienced another Torah class brought to you by TorahAnytime.com.